Looking back now, I truly believe that what happened during my childhood still affects the woman I became. When I was around 3 years old, almost 4, I was abused. Because of that, I spent years carrying something I never spoke about. I only have flashes of those memories, almost like scenes from a dream. But I remember enough. I kept it to myself until I was 17 years old. No one knew. I never told anyone. And over the years, so many things happened that, when I look back, I can understand why I was such a restless and troubled child. At the time, my family lived in the countryside. My parents were hardworking people, and it was just my mom, my dad, my younger brother, and me. My sister hadn't been born yet. I'm the oldest of the three of us. My father needed someone to help him with farm work, and the man he brought there was the same person who abused me. Since I was so young, my memories are fragmented, but I clearly remember him calling me over to the area where there was a corral, almost like a stable. That's where it happened. After that, I started having terrible nightmares. They went on for years. I honestly believe that until I was about 12 years old, I relived that trauma in my sleep almost every night. I never told anyone. My parents worked constantly, and I don't think they had the time or awareness to realize that something inside their daughter had been deeply broken. Life simply kept moving. I never saw that man again after what happened. I had no contact with him and heard nothing about him for years. It was only much later, after hearing things from people back in my hometown, that I started connecting some pieces. I was born in Goiás, but my family moved to Minas Gerais when I was still little, so I've always considered myself a girl from Minas. A few years ago, I heard that the man who abused me had died in prison. I don't know whether it's true, but that's what I was told. I carried that secret until I was 17. As if that wasn't enough, my parents' marriage was falling apart. There was a period when my father struggled with alcoholism, and whenever he drank, he became a completely different person. He turned violent. I still remember that after surviving the abuse, I also had to live through my father's drinking and the constant fights between him and my mother. Then another woman entered the picture. My father's affair made everything worse. Our home was chaotic. We were a deeply dysfunctional family because he drank every day, and every day he became someone else. Their arguments were so violent that sometimes I would stand between them to protect my mother because he was so aggressive. Those memories left deep marks on me too. I remember their final fight very clearly. I was the oldest child, and that day my mother grabbed me and ran. The argument had become so dangerous that my father threatened to kill her because of the affair. They fought all the time, and in that moment, trying to save at least one of her children, she held on to me and ran out of the house. That experience stayed with me forever. With help from her relatives, my mother took me to another city, leaving my brothers behind with my father. We went to Brasilia and stayed with my uncle. He lived near the dump and survived by collecting recyclable materials. I remember arriving there with my mother. They lived in a makeshift shack, and we searched through the trash for things we could eat. My mother and I stayed there for 17 days. One memory has never left me. I was hungry, and everyone around us was extremely poor. There was nothing to eat. My mother found an apple in the trash and handed it to me. I ate it. Even now, I can still remember that moment. I missed my brothers terribly. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I believe I was somewhere between 7 and 9 years old. After 17 days, some relatives felt sorry for my father and told him where we were. He came to Brasilia with my brothers, and my parents reconciled. It wasn't the first time they had separated, but it ended up being the last. My father was full of regret and promised my mother he would change. She agreed to give him another chance, but only if he changed his behavior and moved us away from the town where his mistress lived, because she had become the center of so many of their fights. He agreed. In 1999, if I remember correctly, we moved to Minas Gerais, to the town where I still live today. It was the beginning of a new chapter. My parents arrived there with almost nothing besides the three of us, and the determination to start over. They changed professions and went back to working on farms. Those years in Minas Gerais were difficult too, but they marked the beginning of a different chapter for our family. Around the year 2000, if I remember correctly, my father had reached his limit. Even though my parents still argued, he seemed exhausted by the alcohol, the fights, and the painful life we had been living. One day, he decided he wanted something different and started looking for an evangelical church. I still remember the day he came home from work and told my mother, "I want to become a Christian." It still makes me smile a little because my father used to criticize people who went to church. He mocked them. He called himself Catholic, but he never actually attended church. Yet that day, after coming home tired and seeing how broken our lives had become, he said he wanted to change. I think he believed that if he changed his life, maybe things would get better. And they did. Thank God they really did. My parents joined a church, and they're still there today, more than 25 years later. My father changed so much that I sometimes say he became a completely different man. Both he and my mother had been through so much. They were emotionally exhausted, carrying years of pain and disappointment, and when they found their faith, they embraced it wholeheartedly. My mother was the first one to do that. She had always been calm, balanced, and patient. She gave herself completely, not to religion itself, but to God. About a year later, my father followed. He still had some relapses and occasionally drank during that first year, but eventually he surrendered as well. Life became much better. The fighting stopped. Their arguments disappeared, and alcohol no longer controlled our home. But inside me, things were very different. I carried a lot of resentment toward my father. It's hard for me to talk about this because I don't even know if he realizes I ever felt this way. I blamed him for all the pain I carried from my childhood. Not only had I been abused, but deep down I thought he should have known. I would ask myself, how could nobody notice what had happened to that little 3 or 4-year-old girl? I still remember details of what that man did to me. He touched me. He forced me to do things that, even as a child, made me feel disgusted. Even now, at 37 years old, if I close my eyes, I can still feel what I felt back then. The terror, the panic. I remember being that little girl who lived in fear. For many years, I blamed my father because I thought he should have seen it. And yet, I never treated him badly. In fact, I always tried to stay close to him. Somehow, even though he hadn't seen what had happened to his little girl, I still felt protected by him. I watched him change. I saw the man he became after finding faith, but I still carried anger inside me. By the time I was 14, I was very involved in church. I've always loved helping people, and my brothers and I grew up in a much healthier environment than we had before. Life had improved so much. When I was 14, almost 15, I already had responsibilities in church. I loved what I did, and honestly, I still love serving and helping others today. Back then, I had a dream. The church my parents attended, and where I grew up, is known worldwide, and I admired the pastors and their wives so much. I would look at them and think, I want to be like them someday. I want to be like the pastor's wife. She's so beautiful, so graceful, and the way she carries herself is amazing. Those were the dreams I had, so I threw myself completely into church life. But around 14 or 15, I met a boy. He became my first boyfriend, and he was from church too. That's when another side of me started to come out. I went through that rebellious stage, but it was mostly hidden inside me. I didn't show it openly. I had always done things in secret, keeping that side of myself buried. But after meeting him, I started showing who I really was. I wasn't the perfect little church girl everyone thought I was. At church, I looked sweet and innocent. But at school, I was completely different. I fought constantly because there was so much anger inside me. I had all this pain, resentment, and sadness, and somehow I had to let it out. School became the place where I released everything. I was terrible. I got into fights, insulted people, and acted like a completely different person. At church, I was quiet and well-behaved. At school, I was someone else entirely. And it was around the age of 14 or 15 that I met my first boyfriend. It was with my first boyfriend that I lost my virginity. My father had always been very strict, and when he found out, he was furious. He even talked about throwing me out of the house. Everything became chaos. The truth is, I already had so much anger bottled up inside me. I wanted freedom because I felt like I had grown up in a very sheltered environment, and sometimes I felt suffocated. So when my father said, "If you want to leave, you're free to go," I took those words and ran with them. I said, "Fine, then I'll leave." In what I thought was a brilliant idea at the time, I moved in with my boyfriend. But it didn't last. If I remember correctly, we were together for only 7 or 8 months. As hard as my father had always been on me, he somehow never stopped protecting me. I can't really explain it. When I realized things weren't working with that boy, and after drifting away from church, I felt like I needed to return. Back then, I believed that staying in church meant staying close to God. My thinking is different now, but that's how I saw it at the time. So I went back home. I told my father, "Dad, things didn't work out. Can I come back?" He answered, "Of course." My mother welcomed me too, though my father gave me quite a lecture first. He said plenty, but he let me come home. I returned to church as well. The girl who dreamed of traveling the world, preaching, and one day marrying a pastor had only stepped away from that dream for 8 months. Once I was back, I became committed again. My enthusiasm returned, and this time I was completely focused. I was determined to marry a pastor. And that's really where my story begins. At the church I attended, there weren't any young men around my age. I was 16 by then, and there certainly weren't any pastors my age either. But I had become obsessed with that dream. I would look at the altar and think, that's the life I want. I want to be a pastor's wife no matter what. I had no idea that dream would almost cost me my life. I've always loved working. I started working when I was 12 years old and never stopped. At 16, I was caring for an elderly woman who was already in her 80s. I would sleep at her house every night. My routine was simple: school in the morning, helping my mother around the house in the afternoon, and then spending the night caring for that woman. For over a year, I walked the same route every single day. One evening, while heading to work, I noticed a man standing on the sidewalk holding flyers. I saw him from a distance and lowered my head, hoping to keep walking unnoticed. But when I got closer, he approached me. He introduced himself and said he was a pastor from a church nearby. I knew the church he was talking about. He handed me a flyer, and I politely said, "Thank you, but I'm already a member of another church." I told him which church I attended. The moment I mentioned it, his face lit up. He started walking beside me and said, "Really? I used to go there. I spent 12 years there, but now I'm a pastor at this church." As we walked, he kept asking me questions. "Have you read this author's book? Have you studied this? Do you know about that?" Everything he mentioned I was familiar with. Somehow, we ended up talking all the way to the front door of my workplace. Before leaving, he invited me to visit his church and mentioned that he was single. This man would later become my ex-husband. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I had never seen him before. In my mind, he was just a pastor inviting me to visit his church. As we reached the door, he asked me whether I had read one particular book written by one of the leaders from my church. I told him I had read some books, but not that one. He smiled and said, "I have a copy. I'll lend it to you." Honestly, I didn't think he would actually do it. Then he asked, "Where do you live? I can bring it to you." Naively, I gave him my address. After that, I excused myself because I was late for work and went inside. I spent the night caring for the elderly woman. The next morning, I went to school and later headed home for lunch. As I walked up to the house, my mother was standing at the gate holding a book. She said, "That pastor from that church came by and left this for you." I was surprised. She asked, "How do you know this man?" I told her, "Mom, he was out evangelizing and he said he'd lend me the book." Then she asked, "You gave him our address?" I said, "Yes." And she replied, "Well, he came here, dropped off the book, and said he's going to marry you." I stared at her in disbelief. "What do you mean?" "He said he's going to marry you." I opened the book, and inside, he had written a beautiful dedication. The note he left inside that book was incredibly romantic. He wrote that he had fallen for me the moment he saw me. Before that, he had asked how old I was. I was almost 17, and he was already 25. There was a 12-year age gap between us. The dedication he wrote was beautiful. Looking back now, I know exactly why it affected me so much. At that age, I dreamed of marrying a pastor. I truly believed that becoming a pastor's wife would be the greatest thing that could ever happen to me. Any young girl with the same dream would have been swept away by words like that. Back then, we didn't have smartphones or social media like people do today. I didn't even have a phone, so there was no way to call him and thank him. I just thought, well, that was sweet. I'd only met him the day before, and then the very next day he showed up at my house, delivered the book, left me that dedication, and told my mother he was going to marry me. That stayed in my mind all day. Later, when I was heading to work again, I ran into him. Of course, he already knew which route I took every evening, but this time he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a little girl. As I got closer, I noticed she was tiny, about 1 year and 8 months old, walking beside him. I've always been very outgoing. Despite everything I'd gone through, I've always loved talking to people and making friends. My son even jokes today that I act like a politician because I speak to everyone. So when I saw that little girl, I smiled and said, "Oh, she's adorable. Who is she?" He said, "She's my daughter. She's 1 year and 8 months old." I immediately melted. I have always loved children. Even now, I adore them. It feels like children naturally gravitate toward me, and I've always connected with them easily. I still remember that little girl hugging my leg. She was so tiny. I can even remember what she was wearing that day. Then he said, "She's my daughter. I'm divorced." That second day, he opened up much more about his life. He told me that her mother had abandoned them. According to him, she had cheated on him, walked away, and left him alone to raise their daughter. He told me he had moved from another city, hundreds of miles away, to dedicate himself to God's work. He said he had brought his daughter with him and was raising her alone. Looking back with the experience I have today, I see things very differently. Maybe I'm wrong, but nowadays I would question a story like that. A man moving hundreds of miles away with a 1-year-old child and carrying such a heartbreaking story would raise a lot more questions for me. But back then, I was young and innocent, and I believed everything. He painted her mother as the villain. He made her sound heartless, and I thought, what kind of mother abandons her own child? Poor little girl. She was beautiful, a gorgeous little girl with curly hair and a radiant smile. I often say that I fell in love with his daughter before I ever fell in love with him. He went on telling me how difficult life had been. He said the church wasn't supporting him financially, that he and his daughter were living in shared housing with other people, and that he was struggling to make ends meet. And remember, this was only the second day I'd ever seen him. With the heart I had back then, I couldn't help feeling sorry for them. So I said, "If you want, I can take care of her for you." I genuinely felt compassion. He looked surprised and asked, "Really? You'd do that?" And I answered, "Of course." The next day, I made arrangements with him. I didn't even tell my mother beforehand. I went to school, said goodbye to him and his daughter after they walked me to work. And later, when I got home, I told my mother, "Mom, that pastor who brought me the book has a little girl, and I'm going to watch her in the afternoons because he doesn't have anyone else to help." My mother, whose heart was even bigger than mine, simply said, "Okay." He brought the little girl to our house, and everyone immediately fell in love with her. My parents adored her. My brothers adored her. After only 2 days with us, she started calling me mommy. Even now, talking about this is emotional for me. I was about to turn 17 the following week, and that little girl, who was so lonely and so far away from her mother, began calling me mommy. At the time, all of us believed the story he had told, that her mother was a terrible person. Later, I would learn what had really happened. She called my father grandpa and my mother grandma. My brother became uncle and my sister became auntie. She was only a year and 8 months old, still just a baby. I started taking care of her every afternoon. She stayed with me while he held services at his church, and after the evening service ended, he would come pick her up. 3 days passed. Everything I'm telling you happened in less than a week. After only 3 days, he asked me to be his girlfriend. And I said yes. My father wasn't happy about it. By then, when he brought his daughter to our house, he had already sat down with my father and told him the same heartbreaking story he had told me. In fact, it was the exact same story he still tells everyone to this day. He told everyone the same heartbreaking story. He painted himself as the betrayed husband, abandoned by his wife. According to him, she had left him, abandoned their baby daughter, and run off with another man. But from the very beginning, my father didn't believe him. Not for a second. Everyone in my family thought my father was being unfair, especially me. I kept saying, "Dad, how can you think that? He suffered so much. He's a pastor." My father would just answer, "All right, if you say so." Looking back, I really believe parents have instincts. They sense things we don't. Less than a week after meeting him, he asked me to be his girlfriend, and I accepted, even though my father was against it. Dad warned me. He said, "You can date him, but I don't see a future in this." I couldn't understand it. "Dad, what are you talking about? He's a good man. Look at him raising his daughter by himself. He came all the way here to serve God. He's a man of God." That was my argument. My father reminded me about my previous relationship and how I'd left church because of it. He gave me advice over and over again. But I insisted. "No, Dad, this time it's going to work." And I have to admit something. I wasn't attracted to him because of his looks. I wasn't impressed by his appearance. And it wasn't because he was especially intelligent either. It wasn't any of those things. It was because he was a pastor. Believe it or not, that's what captivated me. I was just a girl. I looked at pastors like they were the holiest people on earth. I believed church was a place filled with saints. That's how I saw it. To me, pastors were almost like superheroes. Whenever I heard that a certain pastor was coming to town, I would get excited. I thought, he's anointed by God. He's God's servant. That's how innocent I was. So I kept telling my father, "He's a pastor. He's suffered so much. He has a little girl. I'm going to date him." And my father finally said, "All right, it's your choice." My father came from the old school. In his mind, if two people were dating, they weren't supposed to date for years. They were supposed to get married. And all of this happened within 2 weeks. My life suddenly became a whirlwind. The truth is, I barely paid attention to his behavior because I was so attached to his daughter. She had already started calling me mommy, and I loved that little girl. You don't need years to love a child. She was sweet and affectionate, and there was sadness in her eyes. You could tell she'd been through something, even though she was too young to explain it. What none of us knew was that she didn't know the truth either. Everything moved so fast. About 30 or 35 days later, he asked me to marry him. By then, I had already left the church where I'd grown up, the church where my parents still serve today, and where my siblings remain. I don't blame churches themselves. I believe problems come from people, not from every church, because there are many sincere and serious ministries out there. But I left my church and joined his. All of that happened within a month. He introduced me to his leader, and I was just a young girl. I didn't have some troubled past. Yes, I'd had a boyfriend before and lost my virginity, and I knew there were expectations in church about marriage and purity, but I wasn't living some hidden life. I loved serving God, and I genuinely loved ministry. His pastor accepted me. Little by little, he gained my trust. Eventually, I trusted him enough to tell him something I'd never shared so openly before. The man who was my boyfriend then, and who would later become my ex-husband. Around the time I turned 17, I had one of the panic episodes that used to follow my nightmares. I'd told you earlier about the dreams that haunted me for years. That morning, I woke up feeling awful. Later that afternoon, I saw him. We had never slept together before marriage. I was doing everything the right way, at least that's how I saw it. He was a pastor, and I was still very young. I told him, I had another nightmare. And he started asking questions. What happened? Why do you have those dreams? Little by little, he drew it out of me, until I finally told him the truth. I told him I had been abused as a child. Because he was a pastor, I believed he would know how to help me. I thought I could trust him. When I told him, he held me in his arms while I cried. Sharing that secret was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I'd carried it alone for so many years. Imagine carrying something like that from the age of 3 or 4 until you turned 17. That afternoon, I finally trusted him enough to tell him my secret. I think it was later in the day, close to evening. He held me and said, I'm here for you. I'm going to help you. I'll take care of you. Then he asked me about the abuse. He wanted details. And I told him everything. Things I had never shared with anyone in my life. He listened and said, I'll help you. You're not alone. I'm with you. At the time, I felt comforted. He knew how to talk. Even today, he knows how to talk. If you met him, you would probably think I was crazy if I told you who he really is. You'd say, there's no way. He's a man of God. He was persuasive. He knew exactly what to say. He told me, your secret is safe with me. I believed him. That night, I went to work to stay with the elderly woman I cared for. I took his daughter with me because by then I took her everywhere. I was already acting like her mother. The next day, after school, I came home around lunchtime and found him there. Little by little, he had started making himself part of my family's routine. He had lunch with us, sometimes dinner too. By then, my parents' financial situation had improved tremendously. We had gone from years of scarcity to having plenty. Even today, my parents' house is full of food and hospitality. My father has never turned anyone away from his table, so he ate with us often, always carrying the same story: the betrayed husband, the abandoned father, the man who had suffered so much. That day, I think it was the first time he'd come for lunch, and what he did next hurt me deeply. The same man who had held me the night before, who had promised to protect me and keep my secret, told my parents everything. Everything. When I got home, my mother was already crying. My father looked at me and asked if it was true, and I admitted it. That was the only day we ever talked about it as a family. I was humiliated. I had always thought that maybe one day I would tell my parents myself, when I was ready. But it was my story, my pain, my secret. If anyone was going to share it, it should have been me. He had no right to do that. Instead of feeling relieved, I felt even more ashamed than I already had. I remember my father asking me, "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say something?" And I answered, "Dad, I was scared. I was ashamed. I was just a child." Meanwhile, my fiancé sat there watching, almost like he was the hero who had rescued me, as if he had set me free. But that wasn't how I felt at all. I felt exposed. I felt embarrassed, and I was angry. My parents were devastated. My father tried to find out who had done it, but I couldn't explain enough for him to know. After that day, We never spoke about it again. Life moved on, and I buried it once more. Today, I can talk about it openly because I found healing. I still remember everything. If I close my eyes, I can still feel the terror I felt as a little girl. That fear stayed with me for years. But today, sharing my story has allowed me to help others who have suffered similar things. Still, he had no right to reveal my secret. I believe I would have told my parents someday, in my own time. When I confronted him and asked, "Why did you tell them?" he wrapped his arms around me and said, "I just want to help you. I want to help you for the rest of your life." Back then, I couldn't see what I see now. Today, I know he was cold and manipulative, but at 17 years old, I didn't understand that. He hugged me and said, "That's why I told them. You need healing. When you marry me, you'll be a pastor's wife. You need to be free from trauma, free from fear. I only wanted to help." That's what he told me. And I was devastated at first. But I was just a 17-year-old girl. My own son is 17 now. Sometimes I look at him and think, how was I already married at his age? I see how young he is, how much growing he still has to do, and I realize I was exactly the same. I didn't have the maturity to understand what was happening. He convinced me. He kept saying, "I'm taking care of you. You need to be ready because you're going to be a pastor's wife." Eventually, I forgave him. I thought, maybe he really wanted what was best for me. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I needed to tell that secret. And without realizing it, the manipulation had already begun. Actually, it had started earlier, when he drew me in through his daughter and made me responsible for her. I cared for that little girl with all my heart, and every bit of love I gave her was genuine. But I couldn't see what he was doing. That was the beginning of the nightmare that would change my life. By then we were engaged, and my father said, "Then let's move things along. I'll pay for your wedding. Is this really what you want?" And I said yes. I was completely enchanted. Just like he kept telling me, I was going to become a pastor's wife. My dream was finally coming true, and I wanted to get married as quickly as possible. I thought, this is going to be amazing. We're going to serve God. We're going to help people. I saw everything through innocent eyes. I was incredibly naive. I imagined myself doing God's work, helping others, reaching people, living the dream I had carried in my heart for years. My father said he'd take care of the wedding and make sure I had a celebration, and he did. Before that, after I had revealed my past and he had told my parents about it, he insisted that I needed to forgive my father because I still had resentment inside me. But the truth was, by then, I already had. After I had left home at 15 and later returned, I had matured enough to understand that my father wasn't responsible for what had happened to me. I had already forgiven him. So I thought, if I'm going to dedicate my life to God's work, I need to be free from everything. I need to give myself completely. That was what he constantly talked about: saving souls, serving God together. 3 months later, my father kept his promise and arranged our wedding. My parents weren't wealthy, but things were much better than they had once been. He did everything within his means. It was simple, but beautiful. As for his family, I barely knew them. I met his mother and father for the first time on our wedding day. They lived in another part of Minas Gerais, and I had never met them before. I also met 2 of his sisters that same day. And I remember looking at his father and immediately thinking, there's something strange about him. I couldn't explain it. As soon as he arrived, he started complaining. He complained about the food, complained about the wedding, complained about having to stay at my parents' house. His mother, on the other hand, was wonderful. Even after everything I lived through during our nearly 18 years together, I have nothing bad to say about her. She is a good woman who suffered a lot because of her husband. In fact, I would later realize that her husband was even worse than his son. She loved everything. I remember showing her the little house we had prepared. We had bought furniture and basic things for our home. I worked and made very little money, but I helped. Looking back now, at 37 years old, I realize I overlooked something that should have been obvious. He didn't work. He lived entirely off the support the church provided him. And because I was so caught up in the dream, I didn't stop to think about it. I think that was probably what my father wanted to question the most, but maybe he simply hoped things would work out. The church gave him a small allowance, and during the day, he didn't do anything else. When we bought furniture for our home, I contributed with the money I earned from working. He used part of his allowance too, but I later found out he had bought some things under another church member's name because his credit was ruined. Another warning sign I completely ignored. A pastor with bad credit, and I didn't even question it. That's what infatuation does. It blinds you. I tell my children that today. We bought everything in installments, and every month I gave him money to help pay for it. 6 months after we got married, I would discover that he hadn't been paying for any of it. But that's a story for later. Before the wedding, he sat me down and said, "Once we're married, you can't work anymore. You'll dedicate yourself entirely to ministry. I'll provide for you and my daughter." His daughter was always with us. I had raised her from the time she was still a baby. She grew up beside me, and to this day, she's my daughter in my heart. She's 22 now, and I love her deeply. He said, "I'll support you, and you'll devote yourself completely to God's work." And I thought that was normal. The church where I grew up operated that way. Pastors dedicated themselves fully, and I assumed that was how every ministry worked. Later, I learned that many pastors have regular jobs too, but at the time I said, "Okay, I'll give everything I have," because I truly loved serving God. So we got married. I believe it was December 25th, either 2005 or 2006. I don't remember exactly, but it was Christmas Day. The celebration was simple, and my father did everything with so much love. But something happened the day before the wedding that I now see as the biggest warning God could have given me, and I completely missed it. The day before the ceremony, we were busy with preparations. He was being his usual self, charming, affectionate, always attentive. Looking back, I realize it was almost suffocating. But back then, I thought it was love. He was always affectionate, always attentive, always showering me with love and attention. Looking back now, I realize it was overwhelming, almost suffocating. But back then, I saw it as love. The day before our wedding, we went to the home of one of the women from his church to borrow something. I don't even remember what it was. We were walking there together when one of the church members passed by. By then, I was already attending that church too. The man greeted my fiancé and then greeted me. And because that's who I am, because I've always been outgoing and friendly, I smiled and said, "Hi." That's all I did. I said hi. The next thing I knew, my ex-husband slapped me so hard across the face that I staggered. For a second, I honestly thought it had been an accident. I was completely stunned. The wedding was the next day. This happened on a Friday. I looked at him, confused, trying to understand what had just happened. Then I saw his eyes. He was staring at me, and there was something terrifying in his face. He said, "As long as you're with me, don't you ever smile at another man like that again?" I burst into tears. I couldn't stop crying, and he kept going. "What do you think you're doing? You're my fiancé. We're getting married tomorrow. How dare you wave at another man like that?" I said, "I just said hi." But he wouldn't stop. "Never again. You were flirting with him." He destroyed me with his words. My face was burning, and I was crying so hard that I couldn't breathe properly. I kept thinking that I had to calm down before I got home because if my father saw me like that, I knew he would never let me marry him. I tried to breathe. I tried to stop crying. But the harder I tried, the worse it got. And while I was sobbing, he called me a whore. He said, "You're a whore." I didn't know what to do. Then one thought came into my mind. Apologize. So I looked at him and said, "I'm sorry, honey." Even today, when I tell this story, I can hardly believe I said that. The moment I apologized, the monster disappeared, just like that. He calmed down, he hugged me and softly said, "I forgive you." And I cried even harder. I kept saying, "I'm sorry. I promise I'll never do it again. I'll never look at another man." And somehow, I convinced myself that I was the one who had done something wrong. Even now, that thought makes me angry at myself, because I remember exactly how I felt. I genuinely believed I had hurt him. I thought, how could I do that to him? Then he held me, stroked my long hair, and spoke gently. "It's okay, my love. Calm down. I forgive you." All I wanted was to hear you apologize. And I clung to him, begging him to forgive me. I said, "Please forgive me. You're the man of my life. You're who I want to marry." Because in my mind, I couldn't lose him. He was a pastor. Then he said, "I was upset. I'm not a violent person. I would never do something like that to you. I forgive you." And he comforted me. Looking back now, I realize how sick that whole situation was. If I were the woman I am today, I would have called the police. He slapped me across the face the day before our wedding. But back then, after he comforted me, I stopped crying. I stopped shaking, and he drove me home. Before dropping me off, he said, "Go straight to your room. Don't let your parents see you've been crying." And that's exactly what I did. I walked into the house and headed straight to my room. My mom asked, "Everything okay?" I said, "Yes, Mom. Everything's fine. We got what we needed." She asked if I wanted dinner, and I said no. How could I tell them? How could I tell my father that the pastor I admired so much had slapped me? And today, I realized something else. I was never truly in love with him. I never was. I was in love with serving God. That's what I wanted. I wanted to dedicate my life to God. I loved church. I loved helping people. I loved ministry. But him? No. I never felt that overwhelming attraction or desire. Some people might judge me for saying that, but I was just a young girl. I honestly believed love would come with time. I thought feelings weren't that important. What mattered to me was serving God. And if I'm being completely honest, the person I truly loved from the beginning was his daughter. That little girl had captured my heart. She was beautiful, sweet, and innocent. And I loved her deeply. I still remember how she had started calling me Mom almost immediately. I wrapped my arms around that little girl, and I never let go. To this day, I still haven't. The next day was our wedding. We got married, and just like I said before, it was a simple celebration. My father did everything he could within his means, and everything turned out according to plan. Then came the honeymoon. At that point, I thought things couldn't possibly get any worse. He had slapped me the day before, but now he was my husband. I told myself it was our honeymoon, and maybe things would be fine. I had been with someone before, so I wasn't a virgin. I didn't have much experience, but I knew a few things. Still, the honeymoon was awful. It was strange and disappointing. That's when I learned that he suffered from premature ejaculation. I don't even know if I should talk about that, but it's part of the story. Nothing about that time felt natural or romantic. Afterward, he would leave the bedroom and spend a long time in the bathroom. I didn't think much of it. I got up, checked on our daughter, because that's how I saw her, as our daughter, and made sure she was asleep. Then I went back to the bedroom and he was still in the bathroom. He had one of those early cell phones, nothing fancy, and he stayed in there forever before finally coming back and going to sleep. On our second day as husband and wife, we moved to another nearby town because his church had transferred him there. By then, I was no longer allowed to work. I was the pastor's wife now. It was the first time I had ever lived away from my parents, and honestly, I was happy. The church was small, but the people were loving. They welcomed me warmly, and they embraced my daughter too. I always call her my daughter, because that's what she became to me. I remember walking into that little church and thinking, my dream has finally come true. I'm going to care for a congregation. I'm going to help people. I was still so innocent. For those who grew up in church, you know what people mean when they talk about first love. That excitement, that passion for serving God. I felt all of that. We had a tidy little home the church provided for us, and all I wanted was to dedicate myself to helping others. But by the third day of marriage, my life had already started turning into a nightmare. That slap before the wedding should have been enough to stop everything, but I had no idea what was coming. Much worse was ahead. Our intimacy was always over in seconds, and afterward he would disappear into the bathroom until I fell asleep. At the time, I didn't think anything was unusual. I hadn't had many experiences, and during that first year I hardly paid attention. My focus was the church and my daughter. My heart was completely open, and I thought everything was fine. Then, on the third day after we got married, he woke me up at 3 a.m. "Get up," he said. "We're going to pray. Get dressed." I was half asleep and said, "I'm tired. I love sleeping." But he insisted. "Get up. We're going down to the church. Didn't you want to be a pastor's wife? Then come on." We didn't have a car, and the church wasn't close to our house. I wrapped my little girl in a blanket. She was almost 2 years old by then, and we walked there in the middle of the night. We stayed praying until sunrise, and I honestly thought, this is dedication. This is part of serving God. On the 4th day, he held his first service there. Everyone welcomed us with kindness. Wherever I went, people treated me well, and those church members were no different. After the service, some of the helpers came over to greet us. One older man shook my hand and said, "Welcome. We're happy you're here." That was all it took. I saw my husband's face change immediately. He became cold and silent, and I had no idea why. We went home without him saying a single word. I put my daughter to bed and walked into our room. The moment I stepped inside, he grabbed me by the hair and said, "Now I'm going to teach you." By the 4th day of our marriage, I learned that the slap before the wedding had been only the beginning. As soon as we got home after church, I put our little girl to bed and went into our room. The moment I walked in, he grabbed me by the hair and said, "Now I'm going to teach you. You're not some loose woman." That night, he beat me so badly. He punched me in places that wouldn't show, my stomach, my back. He threw me onto the bed, slammed me against the wall, yanked my hair, and called me horrible names. I kept trying to explain. I'm the pastor's wife. I didn't do anything. But he wouldn't let me speak. He had become someone else. I remember thinking, I'm going to die here. Our daughter was asleep in the next room while I was being thrown around the bedroom. And once again, I did what I had done before. I apologized. "Please forgive me. I won't do it again." Duh. The second I said those words, he stopped. Just like after the slap before our wedding, the violence ended the moment I blamed myself. Then suddenly he started crying. I was confused. He hugged me and begged for forgiveness, saying he had lost control. But if I behaved and was a good wife, it would never happen again. I was 17 years old, 12 years younger than him. He had his own problems, his own darkness, but I didn't understand any of that back then. I only thought, I have to do better. I won't talk to any men from the church, I promised. We hugged, and then he tried to be intimate with me, but something inside me had changed. For the first time, I felt disgust. I can't describe it any other way. He didn't seem like the same person. I looked at him and thought, what am I supposed to do now? The next morning, I woke up in pain. My body was covered in bruises. My back hurt. Parts of my scalp were sore where he had pulled out my hair. I had been married less than a week. But I thought, I can't tell my parents. He's a pastor. We just got married. I don't want to worry them. Meanwhile, he woke up like nothing had happened. He kissed my forehead and smiled. "Good morning, sweetheart." I stared at him in disbelief. "Can we talk?" I asked. "Sure." I lifted my shirt and showed him the bruises. "Why did you do this to me?" "Because you deserved it," he answered calmly. "But I didn't do anything. I just shook that man's hand. I'm the pastor's wife. I don't want you talking to any man." I begged him, "Please don't ever hit me again, or I'll ask for a divorce." The second I said the word divorce, his hand came toward my face again. "Never say that word again," he said. "You will only leave me if you cheat on me or if I die. Otherwise, you're never divorcing me." I asked, "Why?" And that's when he attacked the deepest part of me, my faith. "Because if you divorce me, you'll go to hell." And I believed him. He picked up his Bible and started quoting verses. "A wise woman builds her home, but a foolish woman tears it down. Do you want to destroy your marriage? You wanted to be a pastor's wife, didn't you? Then behave. Stop acting like a loose woman." I felt guilty all over again. Then he said, "If there's no adultery and you divorce me, you'll go to hell. Is that what you want?" No. I was terrified. The fear he planted in me was stronger than anything. "No, I don't want that." "Then you belong to me," he said. "You have no right to divorce." And life went on. But after that, more problems started. Within 15 days of marriage, my entire life had fallen apart. I had gone from being a girl living with my parents and brothers, a family that stayed close and loved each other, to someone trapped in a nightmare. My father had overcome alcoholism. My parents had rebuilt our home. We had food on the table, laughter, and stability. And suddenly, I felt like I had left all of that behind and ended up starving among pigs, like the prodigal son. Because my life had become hell. During those first 15 days of marriage, I think we fought almost every single day. Maybe there was peace on the first day. But after that, there was always another fight. I still call her our daughter. Honestly, these days she's more my daughter than his. And later, you'll understand why. About 2 weeks into our marriage, I was finishing lunch while trying to take care of her. He needed to eat and head back to church, and I got distracted with the baby. Because of that, lunch was late. When he walked in, he flipped the pots over and sent food everywhere. "You're useless," he yelled. "You can't do anything right." Another thing I remember from those first days was his obsession with sex. For 15 straight days, he wanted it every single day. Even though it never lasted long, he constantly demanded more. Afterwards, he would disappear into the bathroom. I didn't know what he was doing in there. I wouldn't find that out until much later. Ever since the night he beat me, I felt disgust whenever he touched me. The feeling reminded me of what I had experienced as a child. I hated myself for even thinking that way. How can I feel this toward my husband? He's a pastor. I thought I was losing my mind. One day, after he had exploded over lunch, I finally said, "I can't take this anymore. You come after me every day." He looked at me and said coldly, "If you stop giving me what I want, I'll get it somewhere else." I was shocked. "What do you mean? You're a pastor." "You know nothing about life," he answered. "You're naive." I was terrified. At the same time, I remembered what he had taught me, that adultery was the only reason someone could separate. I thought, if he cheats, then I would have a right to leave. But I didn't want a divorce. I had just started what I thought was God's work. There was the church, the members, the people who loved us. Looking back, I can say that no matter how much pain I lived through, God placed kind people around me. They had no idea what was happening inside my house, but they cared for me. I believe my mother's prayers covered me. because she always prayed for me with unwavering faith. After throwing the food and insulting me, I apologized again. "I'm sorry, I won't let lunch be late anymore." And as always, once I apologized, he calmed down. That became my lesson. If I say I'm sorry, he stops. Within 30 days, we had already gone through countless fights. He had thrown my clothes into the kitchen. Our daughter was beginning to witness everything. And this is something I regret deeply. The stress had become unbearable. I started pulling away from her emotionally. She was just a child, and none of it was her fault. But I would think, why did I get involved in all of this? For a few months, I struggled to show affection. She would reach out for love, needing a mother because her own mother was gone and constantly spoken about with hatred, and I felt numb inside. But I knew she was trapped in the same chaos I was. She needed me. At church, though, nobody would have guessed what was happening. There, he was the perfect man. He wasn't handsome, but he knew exactly how to speak. People admired him. They listened to his sermons and thought he was an incredible pastor. Meanwhile, I had been married only a month, and my life had already become hell. He barely let me sleep. He demanded sex every day. Even though everything happened quickly, he would force other things that left me feeling sick inside. Then, after I finally managed to fall asleep, he would wake me at 3 a.m. "Get up. We're going to pray." And if he decided to fast, I had to fast too. "You're the pastor's wife. What do you mean you're not fasting?" There were times he insisted we go 3 days without food. I obeyed because I thought God would bless us. I would pray and cry. "God, please change him. You gave him to me. We have a daughter, and I dream of being a mother someday. Please transform him." But everything was always about him. "We're fasting for the people, for the church, for me," he would say. Never for me. I became weak, exhausted, dehydrated. And if I struggled, he would tell me, "You have to endure. If you can't, then you're possessed." I heard that word so many times, possessed. Eventually, I started wondering if I was the problem. Maybe I'm not good enough to be a pastor's wife. Nothing I did ever seemed to satisfy him. Inside our house, it was complete chaos. He threw things, broke things, and little by little, I became reactive too. If he threw a chair, sometimes I would throw something back. But in church, we were the perfect couple. People looked at us and said, "I wish I had a marriage like theirs." Whenever he preached, I always sat in the front row. And during his sermons, he would point at me and say, "My wife, my wonderful wife, my precious wife." And I would sit there listening, thinking to myself, how can this man speak about me like that in public? After everything he does behind closed doors? By then, I had spent so much time being called worthless at home while being introduced in church as the pastor's honorable wife. It was like living two completely different lives. And somewhere along the way, I came up with what I thought was a wonderful idea. I truly believed that if I gave him a child, everything would change. We only had his daughter, and I loved her deeply, but I thought maybe having a baby together would make him become a better husband. Almost a year had gone by, and during all that time, her biological mother had never shown up. We had phones, but contact was rare, and I had spent that whole year repeating what he told me, that she had abandoned her daughter and didn't care about her. Then one day, while we were still living in that town, someone told him that his ex-wife had just arrived by bus to see her daughter. So we went to the station together, bringing our little girl with us. The moment I saw that woman getting off the bus, something inside me shifted. She looked broken, completely broken, and by then, I wasn't much different. She rushed to her daughter and wrapped her in the tightest embrace. They hadn't seen each other in about a year, and I knew she had struggled just to find out where he had been living. His family always protected him. No matter what he did, they stood behind him. Watching that mother hold her little girl who was already 3 years old, I thought to myself, Something doesn't add up. Because that wasn't the embrace of a woman who had abandoned her child. She cried as she held her. It wasn't fake. It wasn't cold. It was relief. It was love. I stood there with the little girl while he stayed farther away, just watching. And I remember thinking, no woman cries like that over a child she doesn't love. Then she looked at me and said softly, "Thank you for taking care of my daughter." The moment she said that, I knew. This woman was nothing like the monster he had described. I smiled and said, "She's beautiful. I'm happy to care for her." Then she told me something that shocked me. She said she couldn't take her daughter with her because he had won full custody. He had used church money to pay for false witnesses and managed to convince the court that she was unfit. She had no legal way to take her child back. She looked me straight in the eyes and asked, "I can't bring her with me, but will you take care of her for me?" I answered immediately, "I already am. Don't worry, I'll take care of her." And I kept that promise for the rest of my life. She had come all the way from São Paulo to that small town in Minas Gerais just to spend 15 minutes with her daughter before getting back on the bus. Before she left, she looked at me with a look I still remember to this day. It was like she was placing her trust in someone she had never even met. Today, she and I are friends. She's a wonderful woman, and I admire her deeply. As the bus pulled away, the only thing she said was, "Please take care of my daughter." And I did. After she left, I couldn't stop thinking about everything I had seen. That woman wasn't the heartless person he had described. But as soon as we got home, he started attacking her character again. "She's a hypocrite," he said. "Those tears are fake. She's only sorry because she cheated on me. She regrets losing a man like me." And I remember looking at him and thinking, if she's crying because she lost this, then she must have no self-respect. Because the man I lived with was a monster. Life went on. By then, we had been married for about a year. I kept taking care of our little girl, and I started focusing on another dream I had always carried inside me. I wanted to be a mother. In my 18-year-old mind, I truly believed that if we had a son together, he would change. I thought fatherhood would soften him. I thought having a baby would make him treat me differently. So I tried to get pregnant. For a while, nothing happened. Then eventually, I did conceive. But less than 2 months later, I lost the baby. It was a miscarriage, and even in the middle of all that chaos, I still wanted to be a mother. Around that time, I finally started opening up to my parents. I told them what was happening inside my marriage. I told them about his behavior, about the things he said and did. I called them and cried. My parents never tried to force me to do anything. Since I was married, they respected my decisions. But my father always said the same thing. "The day you decide what you want to do, your mother and I will support you." And little by little, after more than a year of marriage, I started telling them everything I had been living through. I started telling my parents everything he did. There was even a time when my dad drove all the way to the town where we lived because we had been fighting again. By then, I had started fighting back. If he threw a chair at me, I'd throw something back. I wasn't willing to just stand there and take it anymore. Our home was chaos, while at church we looked like the perfect couple. After I lost the baby from my first pregnancy, a little over 2 months along, I still held on to my dream of becoming a mother. I kept telling myself, I have to have a child. I thought he loved children, so surely he'd be happy one day. One night I prayed and said, "Lord, I want to be a mother. I want a son. I've always dreamed of having a little boy." I was desperate to become a mother because I convinced myself that having a baby would make everything better. I thought, he would never hurt me if I were pregnant. Surely he would change. I even promised God a name. I'm using a different name here, but I told him, "If you give me a son, I'll name him Emmanuel Felipe." I loved that name. To me, it meant God with us and peace. I held on to that dream with all my heart. Then life continued. At night, we were the smiling pastor and his wife. During the day, our house was a nightmare. He demanded sex every single day. It didn't matter if I was sick, exhausted, or even on my period. If I refused, he became someone terrifying. He would scream, "You're going to die and go to hell because you're denying me. Your body belongs to me." I heard those words so many times. Your body is mine. I own you. I can do whatever I want with you. And I would beg him, please don't touch me. I don't want to. The truth was, I had felt disgusted since that first week of marriage. Whenever I refused him, he would make sure I didn't sleep. He would torment me all night, touching me, pressuring me, refusing to let me rest. Sometimes I gave in simply because I wanted peace. I just wanted to sleep. Then, after that prayer, I forgot about it. The next month, I found out I was pregnant. I was so happy. I could hardly believe it. I took the test without telling him first. I called my mother because I had always told her I wanted a son. In my mind, if I had a little boy, he wouldn't go through what I had gone through as a child. He wouldn't suffer abuse. He wouldn't grow up the way I had. My mother was overjoyed. This would be her first grandchild. I went home holding that positive test in my hand, happier than I had been since the day I got married. In my heart, I already called the baby Emmanuel. That evening, I prepared dinner and thought, maybe tonight we won't fight. Maybe this will be different. He came home from church and sat down to eat. Our little girl sat beside me like she always did. I smiled and handed him the pregnancy test. He looked at it and asked, "What's this?" With all the innocence I still had, I smiled and said, "You're going to be a father." I thought he would be happy. Instead, he flipped the table over. "I can't believe you did this," he shouted. I stood there confused. "What's wrong?" I asked. "I didn't want another child," he yelled. Then he said something I had never forgotten. "I reject this child." At the time, our church wasn't growing. The same members kept attending, and I thought he only cared about bringing people to God. Years later, I would understand that what he really wanted was money. But back then, I had no idea. He screamed, "My church isn't growing and you go and get yourself pregnant? Are you crazy? I reject this child." My baby was already inside me and he was saying those things. I begged him, "Please don't say that." Then I told him, "His name will be Emmanuel Felipe." He laughed. Not a joyful laugh. It was cold, cruel. "You're crazy," he said. Then he looked at me and said, "You wanted this child? Fine. You'll deal with it yourself. I'm not doing anything. I won't help you. I won't take care of you. I won't do a thing. You got yourself into this, so now you can handle it." I still remember something else he said that day. He looked at me and said, "And another thing. I'm sure this baby isn't mine." When those words came out of his mouth, I felt like my whole world collapsed. "What do you mean?" I asked. He said, "You're a slut. You smile at every man in church. Who's to say that child is mine? When the baby is born, I'm getting a DNA test. That baby isn't mine." And he kept saying that throughout my entire pregnancy. But despite everything, I enjoyed being pregnant. I decided not to let his words steal that from me. My parents and my brothers celebrated with me. My family loved that baby from the beginning. Around that time, the leaders of our denomination decided to transfer us back to my hometown, so I could give birth close to my family. I was so happy to return because I would be near my mother again. I thought, he won't be able to hurt me here. My pregnancy itself was wonderful. I had no morning sickness, no dizziness, none of the symptoms I had always imagined. I had wanted to be a mother so badly that I almost wished I could experience all those little discomforts people complain about. But I had none of them. Everything was perfect. My son moved all the time. I talked to him constantly. I would rub my belly and say, "Emmanuel, are you in there?" And he would kick right away. His father barely paid attention. Once in a while, he would put his hand on my stomach, but not often. His daughter, though, was already older and she loved the pregnancy. That made me happy. Then came the days of Orkut and MSN. Back then, those were everything. He was helping at church, and money had become tight, so for the first and only time in our marriage, he actually worked outside the church. For about 3 months, he started traveling with some men from church who bought merchandise in Paraguay and resold it in Brazil. By then, I was 6, 7, almost 8 months pregnant. And honestly, I liked those trips because he was away from me. The farther away he was, the more peace I had. He started traveling every month and even brought back things for the baby. He seemed slightly more involved after that. Then one day, after returning from Paraguay, something changed. He stopped demanding sex from me all the time, and with my huge belly, I thanked God for that. He had a computer and spent hours wearing headphones and playing games. One afternoon, he was at the computer when someone from church called him and asked him to come over immediately. He rushed out and left the computer on. I had never touched it before. I barely knew how to use the internet. My life revolved around church, his daughter, and my pregnancy. But as I walked by, I heard that sound. Blup. A message notification. I turned around and noticed a woman's name. I sat down in front of the computer with my huge 8-month belly and clicked around, trying to figure out where the messages were. Eventually, I opened them, and my life changed again. He had been talking to a woman from São Paulo for over 6 months. Their entire conversation was there. I started reading, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I kept thinking, he's a pastor. He wouldn't cheat on me, which sounds crazy now because he had already beaten me. But somehow, betrayal was still something I thought he would never do. I kept reading. He had told that woman he lived with his parents. He claimed he was struggling financially and that his parents supported him. He told her he was a pastor, that he loved her, and that he wanted to visit her in São Paulo. And she had already sent him money. There was proof of the transfer right there in the messages. I stared at the screen in disbelief. He had made plans to see her the following week. She had sent him around 400 reais, and I could see the receipt in their conversation. He told her he was single. He told her he lived with his parents. He told her he loved her. Meanwhile, I was sitting there, 8 months pregnant with his son, and I read message after message saying, I love you. I'm coming to São Paulo. We're going to be together. From the pictures she shared, I could tell she had money. She seemed to be doing well financially, and according to his messages, he fully intended to go meet her the following week. By the time I finished reading, I couldn't see straight. I snapped. Like I've told you before, I stopped keeping things inside. And in that moment, something inside me exploded. I grabbed the computer with my huge pregnant belly in the way, yanked the plug out of the wall, carried everything outside into the yard, and threw it all down. The computer, the keyboard, the headphones he always used. I took a broom and smashed everything. He wasn't home yet. When he finally came back, I was sitting in the living room waiting for him. He walked right past me without saying a word and headed straight to the room where he always kept the computer. Where's my computer? It's outside, I answered. What do you mean? Go look. He went into the yard, saw the pieces, and completely lost it. You're crazy, you're possessed. What have you done to my computer? I broke it, I told him. I broke it because you were planning to meet a woman in São Paulo. And what shocked me most was that he didn't even flinch. He acted like someone falsely accused of something they had never done. What are you talking about? You're insane. But I read everything. You told her you lived with your parents. You said you had no money. She sent you money. No, you're crazy. Then he started crying. Real tears. He called my parents and even my brother. He sobbed on the phone and said I was accusing him of cheating when he had never done such a thing. I swear before God, he cried. May God take my life if I've ever betrayed her. He cried so hard he could barely speak. My brother came over and tried to calm things down, but after everyone left, he came after me. I was 8 months pregnant, and when he moved toward me to hit me, I ran. The gate was partly open. I squeezed through with my big belly and scraped it against the padlock. To this day, I still have a faint scar from that. My skin was stretched and sensitive, and if he had caught me that night, I truly believe he could have killed my son. His little daughter already knew what kind of father she had. She ran after me. "Come on, Mommy." We went straight to my parents' house. My belly was bleeding a little, though it wasn't serious. The scar stayed. Later, after he had calmed down, I went back home. And just like always, he said, "I forgive you." That was how it always worked. He forgave me. And he never admitted to that betrayal. Not once. Even today, if anyone brings it up to him, he'll say I'm crazy and that none of it ever happened. Time passed, and I reached the end of my pregnancy. One morning around 5 o'clock, I started feeling mild cramps, and my water broke. He was asleep, but I didn't even wake him. By then, I felt nothing for him anymore. I called my dad. "Dad, my water broke. Are you okay?" "I'm fine." I had already packed everything for the baby. My parents arrived around 5 in the morning, and we went to the hospital. Half an hour later, I had my son in my arms. It was a natural delivery, and I barely felt any pain. Everything happened so peacefully. He was beautiful, healthy, and chubby. About 2 hours later, my husband finally showed up. "You didn't even wake me up?" he asked. "No, I didn't want to bother you." He picked up the baby, and as soon as I saw him holding my son, all I could remember were the horrible things he had said while I was pregnant. "Oh, Daddy loves you," he said. And inside, I thought, that's a lie. You don't even love us. I stayed one night in the hospital, and the next day he went to register the baby. Throughout my entire pregnancy, I had called my son Emmanuel Felipe. That was the name I had prayed about and the name I had spoken over him every day. Before he left, I reminded him, "Emmanuel Felipe, don't forget." Back then, fathers usually handled the paperwork. I was still in the hospital when he left. About 40 minutes later, he came back and handed me the birth certificate. I looked at it and couldn't believe what I was seeing. "What is this?" I asked. "Our son's name." "But that's not his name." "So what?" "I called him Emmanuel my entire pregnancy. I told God his name would be Emmanuel Felipe. You said you didn't care what we named him." He had registered our son with a completely different first and middle name. It was a beautiful name, but it wasn't the name I had chosen. And he had told me he didn't care. "I don't care what you wanted," he said coldly. "What matters is what I decided. I'm the father. I'm the man of the house. That's his name now. If you want to change it, go ahead." But how was I supposed to change a name back then? I cried so much. I remember my mother trying to comfort me. "My daughter, let it go. Let's just keep the peace." So I did. My son was 2 months old, and life continued exactly the same way it always had. I honestly thought things couldn't get any worse. I kept telling myself, it's already bad. How could it possibly get worse? I really believed that. I was taking care of my son and raising our little girl, who was around 6 years old by then. She was more independent and even helped me with the baby. Around that time, my husband got into a fight with the church leadership. According to him, they no longer deserved him. He would say, "I'm too good for them. I'm not wasting my life in a place that doesn't appreciate me." By then, he had become obsessed with the internet. He started talking to pastors from another denomination, a very large and well-known church in Brazil. Back then, that church was growing so fast that they were accepting almost anyone who claimed to be a pastor. Through people he met online, he got the phone number of one of their leaders in Goiânia. Without discussing it with me, He called and introduced himself as a pastor. He had already cut ties with his previous church, insulted everyone there, and turned his back on the people who had supported him. He said they weren't spiritual enough for him. He called the pastor in Goiânia and told him he had been with another denomination for 12 years. That was his excuse. My mother still attended that church, and I later discovered he had actually been expelled from there because of sin, but he never told anyone that. Instead, he presented himself as an experienced pastor, and that reputation opened doors for him. The leader in Goiânia welcomed him immediately. "You and your family can come." That meant me, my baby boy, and our daughter. Then my husband came home and announced it. "We're leaving." I just stared at him. "What?" "We're moving." The church leader in Goiânia planned to send us first to another city before eventually bringing us there. Then he told me we had to sell everything. Our furniture, everything. The church will take care of us. We're going to serve God. My son was only a few months old. "What do you mean we're going?" I asked. "We're going. You don't have a choice. You're my wife. A wise woman builds her house, but a foolish one destroys it." Those were the same verses and phrases he constantly used against me. I started crying. I thought about my mother. Even living near her, I was suffering. What would happen if I moved all the way to Goiás? Some friends encouraged me. They had no idea what I was really living through. Nobody did. Only the four of us knew the truth. Me, him, my son, and our daughter. People kept saying, "It'll be wonderful. It's a big church. You'll grow there." So eventually I agreed, and that's how we left. We sold everything. We only kept an old car and a few suitcases. We had no plan, no savings, and no idea what awaited us in Goiás. It was literally just luggage and hope. When we arrived, we introduced ourselves at the church headquarters. The leader barely knew us. He didn't ask questions or test anything. "Fine, you can stay." Then he placed us in an apartment with 3 other people. I had left my parents behind and moved farther away than I'd ever been before. And if I thought I had already lived through hell, I found out I hadn't seen the worst of it yet. Up until then, I still believed church was the holiest place on earth. I thought everyone there was different. But little by little, I started realizing that wasn't always true. The leader basically forgot about us. We were left in that apartment, trying to survive. I had 2 children, no income, and I wasn't allowed to work. I was expected to dedicate myself completely to ministry and serve everyone else. One day, a missionary noticed me. I still follow her on social media to this day and remain grateful to her. I think she sensed something. I was young, with 2 children, and it was obvious we had nothing. We hadn't eaten all day. She walked up to me and handed me 50 reais. "I want you to have this." I'll never forget that. The children were hungry, and so was I. Eventually, things stabilized a little. After some difficult months, they finally assigned us to a church in the countryside of Goiás. And looking back now, during the nearly 18 years I stayed married to him, I ended up living in 18 different cities. That's when the constant moving began. We were sent to a somewhat larger church, and once again my life became the same routine, taking care of my husband, my children, and everyone in the church. I was already carrying so many scars by then. I had been trapped in a terrible marriage, completely cut off from my parents, with no profession, no completed education, and no real independence. I had spent my life working in other people's homes, and somehow I just kept going, one day at a time. Every church we were sent to followed the same pattern. He argued with everyone. Sooner or later, there would be conflict. Looking back, I used to blame myself for everything. I don't know why. Maybe because wherever I went, people naturally approached me. I listened to them. I cared. If someone wanted to talk, I would sit with them and hear their story. People often came to me for advice because I was the pastor's wife, and many still imagine that pastors' wives live perfect lives. Some really do have good marriages and truly serve God. I believed I was serving God sincerely too, but my own life was falling apart. What hurt him most was that people liked me. No matter where we went, people always sought me out first. They would say, "Let's ask the pastor's wife," and he hated that. He tried constantly to make me invisible, but the harder he tried, the more people seemed drawn to me. I never wanted attention, it just happened. As the years passed and we moved from city to city, the children grew up in the middle of chaos. He kept abusing me. I avoided every man in church because I knew even a simple greeting could turn into a nightmare. I remember one birthday in particular. We were in another church, and an elderly man, probably around 70 years old, brought me a small box of chocolates. "Pastor's wife," he said kindly, "I can't give you much, but I wanted to bring you this from the heart." There was nothing inappropriate about it, just kindness. But the moment I accepted the chocolates and glanced over at my husband, I saw the look on his face and thought, "I'm going to pay for this tonight." And I did. By then, my son was old enough to understand more than a child should. He was growing up surrounded by fear. He became angry and withdrawn because he saw the kind of man his father really was. Loud voices terrified him. Whenever there were arguments, he would cover his ears with his little hands. Inside the church, we looked like a peaceful family. Inside our home, my son lived in fear. And despite all his father's attempts to bond with him, my son never seemed attached to him. Sometimes I think he felt everything even before he was born, after all those terrible things his father said during my pregnancy. Even when he was 4 or 5 years old, he never really opened his heart to him. My stepdaughter had started reconnecting with her mother by then. Eventually, I learned the truth about the woman my husband had spent years demonizing. Everything he had told me about her was a lie. He had destroyed her life, just as he was trying to destroy mine. Thankfully, I got to hear her side. I convinced him to let their daughter spend vacations with her mother. By then, we were living in Goiás, and her mother had finally rebuilt her life in São Paulo. She started buying plane tickets so her daughter could visit. I still remember taking that little girl to the airport for the first time. She was so young, flying alone to see her mom. And honestly, I felt happy. Because I knew then that her mother wasn't the monster he had described. That realization made me think about my own future. I had wanted to leave almost since the first week of our marriage, but I knew one thing. If I ever escaped, he would try to destroy my reputation the same way he had destroyed hers. As the visits became more frequent, another cruelty appeared. Whenever my stepdaughter returned from spending time with her mother, he made her miserable. "You smell like your mother," he would say, after she'd spent an entire month with her. "You'll end up just like her. You'll get pregnant young. You'll be a single mother." He cursed his own children with those words. She would cry, and I would hold her. The truth was, I couldn't protect myself, and I couldn't protect them either. So life continued. One city after another. Every place brought new fights. We lived entirely off the church, and I desperately wanted to work. I knew that if I could earn my own money, I would finally have a way out. But I wasn't allowed. Once you belong to those institutions, your entire life belongs to them. You are expected to dedicate yourself completely. There was no room for anything else. Every few months, we were moved again. 3 months here, 6 months there, constantly starting over. And little by little, I stopped seeing church the way I had when I was that 17-year-old girl who got married believing she would spend her life caring for people and bringing them closer to God. The church I was in had become something different. Everything revolved around goals, financial goals, and whenever my husband failed to meet them, he blamed me. "I'm not hitting the numbers because of you," he would say. That's when I finally began to understand something that had taken me years to see. I had always believed his passion was winning souls because that was what mattered to me. I loved helping people, welcoming them, encouraging them, and bringing them closer to God. But his passion wasn't people. It was money. By then, everything had become about numbers and money. Every month the church had goals, and whenever he failed to reach them, guess who he blamed? Me. He would say, "I missed my goal because you're full of demons. You don't help me. You don't wake up to pray. You don't fast. You don't make sacrifices." At that point, I had been married for 6 or 7 years, and honestly, I had no strength left. I was exhausted. He loved climbing mountains to pray and spending nights in spiritual retreats. I didn't want any part of it anymore. I kept thinking, what's the point? In church, he was loving. He hugged me, kissed me, acted like a devoted husband and father. At home, life was miserable. And there was the issue of sex. Every single day he wanted it. I didn't anymore. I would tell him, "Don't touch me." But refusing him never meant peace. If I said no, he made sure I couldn't sleep. He would keep me awake all night, accusing me of sleeping with other men. According to him, I was having affairs with pastors, church workers, anyone he could think of. One day, when my son was around 10 or 11 years old, he crossed a line I never imagined possible. My son had fallen asleep beside me on the bed, and when my husband saw us, he made a disgusting insinuation about me and my own child. That moment shattered something inside me. Life had become unbearable. When my son was about 5 or 6 years old, I was already talking about divorce almost every day. Every argument ended with me saying, "I want out." And every time he answered, "I'm not giving you a divorce. I never cheated on you." I knew he had, even if I couldn't prove anything beyond what I had seen online. Later, we were assigned to another city, and that church became the peak of his success. It was a large congregation, filled with loving people. I would look at them and think, if only they knew what happened behind closed doors. If they knew what I lived through, what I witnessed, what I hid. By then, I desperately wanted to leave him. Then, after months without being together, we had a couple of peaceful days. Just 2 days without fighting. We were intimate again, and I got pregnant. This time was different. I hadn't planned it. And please understand me when I say this. I love my daughter deeply. But I was already drowning. I could barely protect the 2 children I already had, and now I was expecting another baby. I panicked. I called my mother and said, "Mom, I'm pregnant." She was excited. "That's wonderful." I said, "Mom, you don't understand. I was getting ready to leave him. I was planning my separation, and now I'm pregnant." And I prayed constantly, "God, please don't let it be a girl." Not because I didn't want a daughter, I was terrified. I kept thinking, what if she suffers the way I did? What if she grows up and ends up living the same nightmare? When I told him, something strange happened. He was happy. He already knew I had wanted a divorce for years, and suddenly he hugged me, kissed me, and that night at church he announced it proudly. "My wife is pregnant," he shouted. Praise God. Everyone applauded, and there I was, smiling on the outside while falling apart inside. All I could think was, how am I supposed to raise 3 children? I had no education, no profession, no money of my own. I depended completely on him. Technically, he provided because the church paid him, but he threw every expense back in my face. Everything. Even basic things. I remember once needing sanitary pads, and he told me to use rags instead. So I did. He had moments when he played the role of a good father. He would take the kids on trips, to the mall, to the movies. They traveled a lot because the church didn't pay badly. But every outing ended the same way. Fights. Shopping trips became fights. Movies became fights. Birthdays became fights. I honestly can't remember a single happy birthday with him. Not one. The children experienced the same thing. But when it was his birthday, everything had to revolve around him. He loved being admired. He expected people to celebrate him and treat him like someone special. Then I spent 9 months carrying my daughter while completely overwhelmed. And this is something I regret deeply. I couldn't even bring myself to touch my belly sometimes. Not because of her. Never because of her. My daughter is wonderful. She's beautiful, brilliant, and incredibly gifted. She's self-taught, the top student at her school, and she has such a loving heart. She paints beautifully and has talents that amaze me every day. She's almost 11 now. Sometimes I think she came into my life to help me survive. I really believe that. It's like God sent her to bring love into a place that had been filled with pain for so long. And from the moment she arrived, that's exactly what she brought. By that point, everything had become about money. Every month, the church expected pastors to hit financial targets. Whenever he failed to reach those goals, I was the one he blamed. "You're the reason I didn't hit my numbers," he would say. "You're full of demons. You don't support me. You don't pray in the middle of the night. You don't fast. You don't make sacrifices for God." The truth was, I was exhausted. We had been married for 6 or 7 years by then, and I barely had the strength to keep going. I didn't want to spend nights on prayer mountains anymore. I didn't want to pretend everything was fine when my life was falling apart. At church, he acted like a loving husband. He hugged me, kissed me, smiled for everyone to see. At home, it was a completely different story, and the pressure for sex never stopped. Every single day, he demanded it. I didn't want him touching me anymore. I told him that countless times, but refusing him only made things worse. If I said no, he wouldn't let me sleep. He would stay awake all night accusing me of things I had never done. He claimed I was sleeping with other men. He accused me of having affairs with pastors, church workers, anyone he could think of. One day, when my son was around 10 or 11 years old, he crossed a line I never thought possible. My son was lying beside me on the bed, and my husband made a disgusting comment, implying there was something inappropriate between me and my own child. I was horrified. My life had become a nightmare. Years passed, and my son was around 5 or 6 years old. By then, I wanted a divorce more than anything. We fought constantly, and after almost every argument, I told him I wanted out. "I want a divorce." "You're not getting one," he would answer. "I never cheated on you." "Yes, you did." I knew about the online affair, but I had no proof beyond what I had already seen. Around that time, we were transferred to another city. For him, it was the peak of his career as a pastor. The church was large, the congregation loved him, and people respected him everywhere we went. I would look at those people and think, if only they knew. If only they could see what happened behind closed doors. If only they knew what I lived through every day. I still wanted to leave him, but he kept insisting that I stay. Then something happened that completely changed my plans. After months of distance between us, we had a brief period of peace, maybe 2 days. During that time, we were intimate. It had been months since anything like that had happened, and I got pregnant. This pregnancy was different. Please understand, I'm not saying I didn't want my daughter. I love her with all my heart. But at that moment, I was already drowning. I was struggling to protect the 2 children I already had, and now I was expecting another baby. When I found out, I broke down. I remember calling my mother. "Mom, I'm pregnant." She was happy at first. "That's wonderful news." "No, Mom, you don't understand. I was getting ready to leave him. I was planning my separation, and now I'm pregnant." I was terrified. I kept praying, "God, please don't let it be a girl." Not because I wouldn't love her, but because I was afraid. I knew what I had lived through. I knew the pain I carried. I couldn't stop thinking, what if my daughter grows up and suffers the way I did? When I told him about the pregnancy, his reaction shocked me. He was happy. For the first time in years, he hugged me and kissed me. That night at church, he proudly announced it to the congregation. "My wife is pregnant!" Everyone celebrated. People applauded, they praised God, and there I was, smiling on the outside while falling apart inside. All I could think was, what am I going to do now? I had no profession, no financial independence. My entire life depended on the church and on him. The church provided his income, and he constantly reminded me of that. Everything he bought became a weapon, even basic necessities. I remember needing sanitary pads once, and he told me to use cloth instead. So I did. That was the level of control I lived under. Sometimes he would have brief moments when he tried to play the role of a good father. He would take the children on trips, to the mall, to the movies. The church paid him reasonably well, and the kids got to travel more than most children their age. But every outing ended the same way, with arguments. Birthdays were ruined. Family events became battles. I honestly can't remember a single happy birthday during those years. The only birthday that truly mattered was his own. He loved being celebrated. He wanted attention, admiration, applause. He wanted people to treat him like someone special. Meanwhile, I spent my entire pregnancy overwhelmed with fear. I struggled to connect with the baby growing inside me, and I still feel guilty about that today. Because my daughter is incredible. She is kind, loving, brilliant, and talented beyond words. She teaches herself things effortlessly. She excels in school, especially mathematics. She can paint, draw, and create beautiful artwork. Even as a child, she amazed everyone around her. Sometimes I look at her and think that she arrived in my life carrying a light I desperately needed, as if God sent her to help me survive. The problem wasn't her. The problem was that I was completely broken. I didn't realize it then, but I was already sinking into depression. I kept wondering how I was supposed to raise 3 children while living the life I had. Financially, we had what we needed. The church made sure of that, but I had no peace, and peace was what I needed most. My baby cried constantly, and I truly believe she felt everything around her. Babies sense things. My pregnancy with my son had been different because emotionally I had still been okay. But this time, I wasn't. I was falling apart. I was living on the 9th floor, trapped in that depression without even realizing it was postpartum depression. One night, all 3 children were asleep in my bed. My oldest daughter was there, the baby was lying in the middle, and my son was curled up near the edge. He still hadn't come home. I sat there looking at my children, and it felt like my whole life replayed in my head. Everything I had endured up to that point came flooding back. I thought, how am I supposed to raise 3 children? I don't have a profession. I depend on the church and on whatever he chooses to give me. I walked toward the balcony. There was a glass door and a safety screen, and I looked down. For a moment, I seriously considered jumping. I thought, if I do this, everything ends right now. I had already put my left foot up when something stopped me. In my heart, it was as if God said, "And what about your children? He won't take care of them." My mother had always prayed for me. Even far away, she knew pieces of what I was going through, and I believe she was praying for me that night. I looked back toward the bed where my 3 children were sleeping and felt terrified. I whispered, "Lord, I can't do this." And deep inside, I felt, "You will." My C-section incision was inflamed. I hadn't eaten. I was alone. During the day, someone helped me because he had arranged for that. But every night I was by myself. He finally came home around midnight. I didn't even ask where he had been. I barely cared anymore. I just wanted him to leave me alone. The next day, despite my stitches hurting badly, he told me, "I need you to come to church with me. I want to talk to you." This was the day after the wedding he had officiated. I said, "My incision is hurting. One side has opened up." "You need to come," he insisted. "I want to talk there." For a second, I thought maybe he was finally going to ask for a divorce. Honestly, I thought that would bring me peace. So I got the kids ready, climbed into the car, and went with him. Once we arrived, he took me into the office we had at the church. He sat down and said, "I need to tell you something." I asked, "Why couldn't you tell me this at home? I'm in pain." "No, it has to be here." I told him, "Go ahead." He said, "Yesterday at the wedding, I brought Sister So-and-so with me to help. You know, the wife of my pastor friend." I asked, "Didn't her husband come?" "No, he couldn't." Then he looked at me and said, "When I was taking her home, I ended up with her." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" "We were together in the car." My stitches had been hurting, but in that moment I couldn't feel them anymore. I said, "She's married. She's your best friend's wife." He shrugged. I couldn't help it. I dropped off the older lady first. Then she was the last one left. We were talking, and I pulled the car over. It just happened. "Inside the car?" I asked. "Yes." I couldn't understand why he had brought me to church to tell me this. Then he answered that question himself. "Because here you're obligated to forgive me." I felt numb. Obligated. He grabbed a Bible and opened it. The Bible says we forgive 70 times 7. I stared at him. "Do you even hear yourself? You slept with your best friend's wife?" Honestly, I wasn't even thinking about myself at first. I was thinking about his friend. He was a decent man. As far as I know, he never found out, because I never told him. I asked, "How could you do that to your friend?" He replied, "You were recovering from childbirth. You hadn't been with me in so long. I told you I'm weak." At that moment, something clicked inside me. While I had been home, overwhelmed and feeling those horrible thoughts that made me want to die, he had been with another woman inside his car. And not just any woman, a married woman, the wife of his best friend. I thought, so that's why I felt such darkness that night. I looked at him and said, "I'm not forgiving you." "You will," he answered coldly. "You don't have a choice." Then he added, "I'm not losing this church. Do you know how many people come here every day? 500. I'm the guy here. I'm not giving this up. This church brings in 100,000 rees." I said, "That money isn't yours." He laughed. And that was the day my innocence finally died. Not because I became bitter, but because I stopped looking at everything through naive eyes. He laughed again. "You really think only 100,000 comes in here?" I was confused. "What do you mean?" I helped with the church finances whenever money passed through my hands, and I always reported everything honestly. But there were meetings he held alone during the day while I stayed home taking care of the children. That day, he admitted that he wasn't reporting the real amounts. And strangely enough, what he confessed next shattered me even more than the affair. Because for the first time, I wasn't just looking at an unfaithful husband. I was looking at a thief. I was looking at a criminal. And I realized there was nothing left to save. I looked at him and said, "How can you do something like this? Aren't you afraid of God?" He laughed right in my face. "God? What are you talking about? You're too innocent." And deep down I thought, thank God I am. Then he looked at me and said, "You're not leaving me. I'm not losing this church. I'm not losing these people. I'm not giving up the life you have. Do you want to lose it?" We did have a comfortable life. The church provided well for us. And in my mind, everything we had came from the official support pastors received. I was so consumed by my children, my pain, and trying to survive that I had never paid attention to the fact that he was stealing. He kept saying, "You're not leaving me." I answered, "But you told me yourself that adultery gives me the right to divorce." Even in that moment, I was so emotionally broken that I reminded him of the Bible. He answered, "That applies to me, not to you. I cheated. If you had cheated on me, I would throw you out, take my children from you, and destroy your life. but I'm the one who cheated, and you are required to forgive me." I was in shock. That day, I knew with certainty that I had to leave. Then he warned me, "You're not telling anyone about the affair." I said, "I won't." "And you won't tell my friend either?" "No," I answered. "He doesn't deserve that. He's a good man." "And you won't go after her?" "I won't." By then, I felt nothing for him anymore. What hurt me most was realizing that after almost 14 years of marriage, my entire life had been built on lies. And that was when I started paying attention to everything around me. Not everyone, because I know there are sincere people serving God. I believe that. But I realized I had been living in a different reality. For me, and for many others, we were trying to serve God honestly. But not everyone around us had the same motives. I began noticing things I had ignored before. One pastor drove an imported luxury car, even though his church salary shouldn't allow it. Another pastor had the same kind of lifestyle. And slowly, the pieces started coming together. Until then, my prayers had always been the same. God, bless my marriage, change my husband, save my family. But after that day, my prayer changed completely. God, I need to leave. I have a newborn daughter and 2 small children. I don't know how, but I need a way out. He interrupted my thoughts. "So, are you forgiving me or not?" I said quietly. "I forgive you." "Good." He hugged me. "That's why I love you so much. That's exactly why I love you." I walked out of that church shattered. Inside, I told God, I have to get out. It may take years, but I have to leave. For me, this is over. After that, I no longer wanted to be at church. Something inside me had changed, and even though he thought he would never face consequences for what he had done, life had other plans. About a month later, he was removed from that church. It wasn't because of me. I almost wish it had been. People discovered that the numbers weren't adding up, and in that denomination, when finances didn't match, they simply moved pastors around. They told him, "You're leaving this church. You're no longer overseeing the 10 pastors." He had been supervising 10 churches, plus his own. They were sending him to a much smaller church, but pride wouldn't let him accept that. Me? Move down? Never. So he came up with another plan. Without my knowledge, he had been saving money for years. I had access to almost nothing financially. Looking back now, I realized the truth went much deeper than I knew. He said proudly, "I'm the guy." 500 people came through that church every day. I've already built churches before. I'm leaving and starting my own. And strangely enough, what became his downfall was also the beginning of God answering my prayers. I had started praying for justice. I asked God to expose him and humble him. I said, "What do you mean start your own church? What structure do you even have?" "I have money," he answered confidently. "We'll leave, start our own church, and rebuild. I even have the name already." I remember thinking, God, what am I doing with my life? I still had no profession. I had 3 children. I didn't want to go back to my parents with nothing. I felt ashamed and trapped, so I followed him again. He opened the church in a town in the interior, convinced he would succeed. 3 months later, it collapsed. He treated people badly, just like he always did. Financially, it wasn't giving him what he wanted, and everything fell apart. We returned to Goiânia, where we had originally come from, and things only got worse. By then, I spent more time at church while he stayed home. But I always say that God knows exactly how to work. Because during that time, a woman came into our church. And she didn't know him. She didn't know me either. I always say that God works in ways we don't understand. One day, a woman walked into our church simply because she liked the sign outside. She decided to stay. She was a seamstress, and at that point I was desperate to learn a trade. By then, we weren't really living off the church anymore. Attendance was low, money was tight, and we were struggling. One day she came up to me and said, "Pastor's wife, I'm a seamstress. I love this church, and I love you." People still called me pastor's wife. Some of them still do. I asked her, "Would you teach me how to sew?" I knew I had to find a way out. I didn't know when, but I knew I had to. She smiled and said, "Of course." When I told him I was going to learn sewing, he exploded. He flipped the bed over, smashed the wardrobe, and screamed, "You're not doing that." "Yes, I am," I told him. "I'm not going to sit at home doing nothing." So I learned. She taught me everything she knew, and eventually she even brought me clients. My mother helped me too. She let me use her credit card, and I bought my sewing machines. I started my own little clothing business. Meanwhile, his church was collapsing. He couldn't stand it. He kept saying, "You're crazy. You should be focused on ministry. My church is falling apart." But I kept working. After 17 years, I received money that I had earned myself. I remember holding it and saying, "My God, this is my money. I earned this." My oldest daughter, who by then was around 15, asked me, "Mom, will you teach me too?" Of course. She learned alongside me, and together we built our sewing business. That drove him crazy. Since his church was falling apart, I became the one supporting the household. He stopped doing almost everything. He spent his days watching Netflix, which I paid for. At night, he'd preach to 30 or 40 people at most, but otherwise he did nothing. His dream had completely failed. Meanwhile, my daughter and I worked from home. We hired someone to help us, and little by little the business grew. I paid the rent. I paid for the children's private schools. I covered everything. Thank God my children never lacked the basics. But he became even more bitter. Looking back, I think he fell into depression after his failure. He constantly insulted me, called me trash, and cursed at the children. The only child he never mistreated was our youngest daughter. He practically idolized her. Then the pandemic hit. Everything shut down. I looked around and thought, "God, what am I supposed to do now?" His church had dwindled to around 20 people and kept shrinking. I still lived in hell with him, and now I had rent to pay and 3 children to provide for. And I felt God put one thought in my heart: make masks. I rushed to the last stores still open in Goiânia, bought fabric, and started making face masks. I found customers, and one of my biggest supporters ended up being his own cousin. His cousin lived in Brasília. When he found out I was sewing masks, he called me. "Anna, I'll buy from you." My daughter and I worked day and night making masks. We barely slept. Meanwhile, he sat comfortably watching series on Netflix. At 11 o'clock at night, I'd finally stop. The sink would be overflowing with dishes. My kids would still need baths. And my oldest daughter and I would still be working. His cousin bought from me, and with that money, I paid the rent. By then, I was exhausted. Around that same time, I met a friend who was a hairstylist. I asked her, "Can you teach me hair?" She said yes. So during the pandemic, while making masks, I also learned hairstyling and started taking clients in their homes. And of course, he started accusing me. He said his own cousin was my lover. The man lived in Brasília and was helping us, but according to him, I was having an affair. Months later, his cousin came one last time to pick up a large order of masks. After he left, my husband completely lost it. "You're a whore," he yelled. "You think I didn't see the way he looks at you?" I had worked until almost 3 in the morning making those masks. The 1,000 reais I was going to receive would cover our overdue rent. I stared at him. "Are you crazy? He came here with you. There were other people here too. He lives in Brasília." But he spent the whole night insulting me. He wouldn't let me sleep. He kicked me. Our fights had become violent. One time he hit me with a clothes hanger so hard it broke and left marks on my face. That was the only time my face showed visible injuries. Sometimes I think if there had been a knife nearby, he would have killed me. And through all of it, he kept accusing me. But I almost forgot something. Before the pandemic, maybe 15 days earlier, he had confessed another affair. He came to me and said, "We need to talk." I already knew that tone. What now? I cheated again. Again? This one was from the church. I went to visit her and we ended up together. I looked at him and asked, "How can you keep doing this?" His answer never changed. "You have to forgive me and you're not going after her." By then, I had already started sewing. I was emotionally drained and every fight with him lasted forever. So I simply said, "I forgive you." Not because I was okay with it, but because I couldn't handle another endless war. He hugged me and said, "You forgive me because I'm the love of your life. It's only because you don't want me anymore that these things happen." By then, I barely recognized my own life. By then, I couldn't stand him touching me anymore. I felt disgusted. At night, when we went to bed, I would turn away from him and keep my distance. I didn't want him anywhere near me. When he confessed to cheating again, I just said I forgave him because I had already made up my mind. I was sewing, learning hairdressing, and all I could think about was making enough money to leave. He told me the woman was someone from our church. She kept attending services afterward, and honestly, I didn't even care anymore. I was completely numb. Then came the night when his cousin had stopped by to pick up the masks I had been making. After he left, my husband spent the entire night insulting me. He kicked me so hard that a vein in my leg burst. I still have the mark today. I looked at my leg and thought, enough. I stayed quiet and waited for him to fall asleep. He had to leave the next morning, and while he slept, I prayed and said, "Tomorrow I'm leaving." I had the 1,000 rees his cousin had paid me, money I was supposed to use for rent, but I didn't care anymore. I had always told him, "The day I leave, I'm not coming back." He used to laugh and tell me I had nowhere to go and no profession. But now I had 2 professions. The next morning after he left, I packed a few clothes, gathered our documents, and got the kids ready. "Where are we going, Mom?" they asked. "We're just going on a little trip," I told them. He had taken the car, even though it was mine, so I called a taxi and went to the bus station. Before leaving, I turned off my phone. By the time he realized we were gone and came looking for us, the bus had already left. When I arrived at my parents' house, he was already out of control. He had been calling my mother and father nonstop, making their lives miserable. I stayed there with my 3 children for 21 days. My youngest was older by then, and the older kids were teenagers. Instead of blocking him, I listened. He called constantly, crying, saying he loved me and begging me to forgive him. "I know I've cheated on you many times," he admitted. I looked at him in disbelief. "I only know about 2. Then he confessed there had been around 7 women. I was overwhelmed. I kept thinking, how am I going to do this alone? My mind was a mess. After 21 days, I made the mistake of giving him another chance. In 17 years of marriage, I had never actually separated from him before. I thought maybe, just maybe, he would change. He came to get me, saying all the right things, and I let him convince me. My father was heartbroken. He even left the house before we departed because he couldn't bear to watch me go back. He had told me, "You finally got out, and now you're returning?" But I went anyway. And that was when I truly saw hell. By then, we were in the middle of the pandemic. Everything was closed, and I had run out of money. He had moved our things into the back of the church building. On the drive back, while we were on the highway, he grabbed my phone, took out the SIM card, and threw it away. "You don't need that number anymore," he said. "Everything starts fresh now." The moment we arrived in Goiânia, he isolated me from everything. He deleted my social media accounts and made shared accounts connected to his. He bought me a new number, and from then on, I wasn't allowed to have my own social media anymore. Everywhere I went, I had to make video calls to prove where I was. He constantly accused me of having an affair with his cousin and threw it in my face over and over again. Not long after that, we both caught COVID. He nearly died. We stayed isolated together, and those months were unbearable. Before I had left him the first time, whenever I refused intimacy, he would fight with me and yell, but eventually leave me alone. After I came back, everything changed. When I told him I didn't want to be with him, he started forcing himself on me. He would pin my arms down, cover my mouth, and even put his hands around my neck. More than once, I woke up in the middle of the night with him on top of me, his hand over my mouth. "Stay quiet," he would whisper. I would beg him, "Please don't do this." And he would answer, "I'm going to. This is what you deserve." One day I prayed and said, "God, I know you gave me a chance to leave and I came back, but if I get out again, I will never return." Over the years, he had also become addicted to pornography. I had forgotten how many times I caught him disappearing into the bathroom for that. Our finances were a disaster, but I kept working. I supported the children, paid the bills, maintained the house, and even paid for the car. Meanwhile, he became increasingly violent, especially with the kids. At church, he still acted like a holy man, even though his congregation had shrunk to around 20 people. One day, I was sitting on the couch, exhausted, watching the life I had built with my own hands while living with a man who had become a stranger. And I knew something inside me had changed. I couldn't keep living that way forever. I was sitting on the couch when I noticed something on the floor near him. That's when I realized he was watching pornography right there with me and the kids in the room. I looked at him and said, "What are you watching?" He jumped and said, "Nothing." I said, "You're watching that with the children sitting here? What's wrong with you?" The second I said that, he got up and swung at me. But my son stood up at the same time, trying to protect me, and the punch hit him instead. My boy fell. And in that moment, I knew I had reached my limit. He had hurt the children before, many times, but never like that. My son got back up furious and said, "Mom, when I grow up, I'm going to kill him." That was when I realized my children were breaking under everything they had lived through. He looked at me and said, "If you don't change our situation, I will." I held him, trying to calm him down because he wanted to go after his father. He was already 12 years old and his lip had been cut. Looking at him, I thought, what am I doing to my children? That night, I didn't sleep. He went to the living room, angry and pouting, while I stood by the bedroom window talking to God. I said, "Lord, you got me out once, and I came back. But if I leave this time, I'm never coming back. Please help me." I stayed awake all night making a plan. I had no money. Then the next morning, my sister called and said, "I put 300 rays into your account." I had just asked God for help. He woke up acting like nothing had happened, just like always. He kissed me and asked, "Are you going to be sweet to me today?" I answered, "Of course, my love." But in my mind, everything was already decided. He smiled and said, "You're the best wife in the world." I played along. "You'll have the best wife in the world," I told him. He hugged me and kissed me. That was the last time he ever touched me. He said he was going to church to pray. I was relieved because I needed him out of the house. I even made him breakfast, smiling while inside I was terrified. As soon as he left, I woke the kids and said, "Get up, we're leaving." They asked where we were going, but I just said, "Get up." I gathered whatever I could, including the supplies from the little beauty salon I had set up at home because I still needed to work. I loaded everything into my car, put the children inside, and told them, "It's over. You'll never have to live like this again." As I drove out of the garage, I saw him in the distance. The church was on the same street, and he was standing there looking in the opposite direction. I knew I had to leave right then. I tossed the key back through the gate, turned off my phone, and went straight to my children's schools. I told the principals, "I'm in danger. I need their transfer papers because I'm leaving for Minas Gerais." They helped me immediately. I needed every document because I knew he would try to make things difficult. With my phone still off, I got on the road without even warning my parents. After driving about 300 kilometers, I finally turned my phone on to call my mother. There were 349 missed calls from him. I answered once. "Where are you, you slut?" he screamed. I said, "I'm free." "I'll kill you," he shouted. "Come back right now. If you don't, I'll tell everyone you stole from the church, that you cheated on me." I said, "Go ahead, I'm not coming back." Then I hung up and kept driving. When I arrived at my parents' house, I told my mother, "I'm here to stay." She hugged me. My father looked at me and said, "You should never have left here in the first place." After that, he kept calling, and I blocked him. I got a protective order and filed for divorce. I paid for everything myself. He refused to sign at first, but eventually he agreed after I removed the protective order. He never came here, though he kept trying to get back into my life for years. Even 5 years later, he still tried. I blocked him everywhere I could. He paid child support only when he felt like it, but thankfully I never depended on it. I kept working and rebuilding my life. I tried another relationship after him, but it didn't work out. Still, I kept moving forward. He never laid a hand on me again. His daughter came with me, and I raised her as my own. Today, she's in college studying dentistry in a nearby city. My son is 17 now. My oldest daughter, who is 22, is my daughter in every way that matters. My youngest is about to turn 11. I kept working, and I never abandoned my faith. I still go to church, just not the same one. God has been faithful to me. In 2023, I met my husband. We met through church, and we got married. He was a wonderful man, a man of faith, and I felt blessed to finally experience a healthy marriage. But life surprised me again. We had only been married for 10 months when he passed away. It's been almost a year now, and losing him knocked me to the ground all over again. I remember talking to God and saying, "I don't understand. I spent 17 years in a marriage where I suffered so much. I spent years believing that everything I did for the church would bring blessings into my life. Then, after all those years of pain, I finally met a good man. We were married for only 10 months when he died in a tragic accident. He was truly a wonderful person. But during those years after divorcing the father of my children, I had rebuilt myself. I became a professional, went back to school, and started studying education. After my husband passed away, I changed majors and began studying business administration. Today, I have a good job, and almost a year has gone by since I lost him. His death broke me. When he died, I honestly thought I was going to die with him, because for the first time in my life, I had experienced real love. I didn't understand why God allowed him to leave, and I still don't have all the answers. But I kept going. I still go to church, although not the way I used to. I no longer devote myself to ministry like I once did, because I learned that serving God doesn't require living the way I did back then. Today I have a stable career, and thankfully my husband made sure I was taken care of. I wasn't left helpless, and my children are doing well. Almost a year later, I met someone whose story carries pain and loss much like mine. Slowly, I've been learning to start over again. This time, though, I'm doing it differently. After everything I've lived through and all the weight I carry, I'm choosing to walk through life more lightly. He's a kind man, and I believe God brought him into my life as a reminder that he never let go of me. And that's my story. If there's one thing I want women listening to understand, it's that God is bigger than the name on a church sign or any denomination. Even when we think we're alone, he doesn't let go of our hands. I experienced restoration once when I met my late husband. We were truly happy together. The day he died, I remember asking God, "Why, Lord?" Today I understand some things better than I did then, and I know that God restores. To anyone listening to me, I want to say this: don't let go of God because he won't let go of you. I had every reason to become bitter. I could have followed the same path I saw other people taking. I could have turned my back on church altogether. But I chose not to, because I believe people can fail, but God does not. These days, I go to church on Sundays. I joke that I've become a Sunday Christian. My boyfriend goes with me. He has a daughter, and he also has his own story of overcoming pain. He's a good man, someone I wasn't expecting, and he came into my life during a season when I truly needed support. After all the grief and everything I've carried, I chose to begin again. And to anyone hearing my story, I want to leave you with this. Don't give up on your life. Don't give up on your faith. Don't give up on God. Start over as many times as you need to. Keep moving forward. Hold on to God because He will never let go of your hand. And that's the end of my story.